I never thought a Tuesday morning would change my entire life. My name is Rebecca, and I'd spent the last 38 years doing exactly what everyone expected of me. Wake up, go to my accounting job at a mid-sized firm in Philadelphia, come home to my small apartment, microwave something for dinner, and fall asleep watching reruns of cooking shows I'd never have the courage to actually try. My marriage had ended 3 years prior. My ex-husband Marcus had moved to California with his new girlfriend, and I was left with half of nothing and a mountain of what-ifs. That morning started like any other. The alarm buzzed at 6:30. I hit snooze twice, rushed through my shower, and grabbed my usual coffee from the corner shop where the barista, Danny, already had my order ready before I even walked in. Medium latte, no sugar, extra shot of espresso. He smiled at me the way he always did, that polite customer service smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and I smiled back the same way. "Another day in paradise, Rebecca," he said, handing me the cup. "Living the dream," I responded, the same exchange we'd had 1,000 times before. I worked in a gray cubicle under fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, a sound I'd learned to tune out, but that still gave me headaches by Thursday. My coworkers were pleasant enough. We'd exchange pleasantries about the weather or someone's kid's soccer game, but I'd never been invited to happy hour or weekend barbecues. I was the quiet one, the one who kept her head down and got her work done. Invisible, but reliable. My boss, Mr. Patterson, was a heavy-set man with a perpetually red face who breathed loudly through his mouth. He'd stop by my desk occasionally to drop off files, always saying the same thing. "Rebecca, these need to be done by end of day. I know I can count on you." And I'd nod, take the files, and stay late if I needed to, because what else was I going to do? Go home to my empty apartment? At least at work, I had a purpose, even if it was just reconciling other people's numbers and making sure decimal points lined up correctly. But that Tuesday was different because of a phone call I received just before lunch. It was my Aunt Linda's lawyer, a man named Theodore Brennan, calling from Boston. "Miss Rebecca Hartley?" His voice was professional, slightly nasal. "Yes, speaking. I'm calling regarding your Aunt Linda Hartley. I'm sorry to inform you that she passed away last week." I sat down heavily in my chair. Aunt Linda. I hadn't seen her in nearly 15 years, not since my mother's funeral. She'd been the eccentric one in the family, the one who never married, who traveled constantly, who sent postcards from places like Morocco and Thailand but never called on birthdays. My mother used to say Linda was running from something, though she never said what. "I'm sorry to hear that," I managed to say. "She left specific instructions in her will. You're named as the sole beneficiary of her estate." My heart started beating faster. Estate? Linda had an estate? Well, it's not what you might expect. There's a property in Maine, a small coastal house, and its contents. No significant liquid assets, I'm afraid. She lived quite modestly despite her extensive travels. The property is fully paid off, but it's quite old and likely needs substantial repairs. I need you to come to Maine to sign the paperwork and decide what you'd like to do with it. We can arrange an estate sale if you prefer not to keep the property. I stared at my computer screen, at the spreadsheet I'd been working on for the past 2 hours. Rows and columns of numbers that suddenly seemed completely meaningless. "When do you need me there?" "At your earliest convenience. I'm available Thursday afternoon if that works for you." I thought about my accumulated vacation days, 23 of them, hoarded over the years because I never had anywhere to go. Thursday works. After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment before getting up and walking to Mr. Patterson's office. He was eating a sandwich at his desk, mayo on the corner of his mouth. "Mr. Patterson, I need to request some time off. A family matter." He looked surprised. I'd never asked for time off before. "How long? A week? Maybe 2? I'm not entirely sure yet." He wiped his mouth. "Well, I suppose we can manage. Jenkins can take over your accounts temporarily. Is everything all right?" "My aunt passed away. I need to handle her estate." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." "Yes, of course. Take what you need." I drove to Maine on Wednesday, taking my old Honda Civic that rattled above 60 miles per hour. The drive gave me time to think about Aunt Linda, to try to remember the woman who'd seemed so glamorous and mysterious to my teenage self. She'd worn flowing scarves and had laugh lines around her eyes. She'd smelled like jasmine and cigarettes, and she'd once told me that the worst thing a person could do was live a life that wasn't theirs. I'd thought about that comment many times over the years, especially during my marriage to Marcus, when I'd wake up in the middle of the night and wonder who I'd actually become. Was I living my life, or someone else's idea of what my life should be? The house was in a small town called Harborside, right on the coast. It took me 40 minutes to find it after I'd passed through the town proper, driving down increasingly narrow and poorly maintained roads until I finally found the address matching the one Theodore had given me. It was a small, weathered Cape Cod-style house, gray shingles that had probably once been white, shutters hanging at odd angles, grass overgrown in the yard. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I met Theodore at the house the next morning. He was exactly as I'd imagined from his voice, thin and precise, wearing a suit despite the casual coastal setting. He handed me a thick envelope of documents and a set of keys. The house is structurally sound, according to the last inspection, but it hasn't been occupied in about 8 months. Your aunt spent her final year in a care facility in Boston. Dementia, I'm afraid. Everything inside is as she left it. He walked me through the paperwork, pointing out where I needed to sign, explaining that I was now the legal owner of this property and responsible for all associated costs. Taxes were current, he assured me, but I'd need to decide soon what I wanted to do. Have you considered selling? I haven't considered anything yet, I admitted. Well, the real estate market here is decent. Coastal properties, even ones in this condition, tend to sell. You might get $200,000, maybe $250,000 if you're patient. After he left, I stood in front of the house for a long time before I finally used the key to open the front door. It stuck, swollen from humidity, and I had to push hard with my shoulder before it finally gave way with a groan. The smell hit me first. Musty, closed up, that particular odor of a place that hasn't had fresh air in too long. Dust covered every surface, thick enough to write in. The furniture was old, mismatched, clearly collected over decades. A faded floral couch, a wooden rocking chair, shelves crammed with books and strange objects I couldn't immediately identify. I walked through slowly, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The kitchen was tiny, with outdated appliances and chipped countertops. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub and pink tile that was probably original to the house. Upstairs, there were 2 small bedrooms, one with an iron bed frame and a patchwork quilt, the other completely empty except for more boxes. Boxes were everywhere, stacked in corners, piled in closets, filling what should have been a dining room. All of them taped shut, labeled in Aunt Linda's handwriting with cryptic notes like Morocco, 1996, or Thailand treasures, or simply miscellaneous. I felt overwhelmed. This wasn't an estate, it was a life's worth of accumulated memories and objects, and I had no idea what to do with any of it. That first night, I stayed in a motel in town, a place called the Seabreeze Inn that had definitely seen better days. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet, but it was clean enough. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the ocean in the distance, and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do. The next morning, I returned to the house with cleaning supplies I'd bought at the local hardware store. If nothing else, I could start sorting through things, figure out what might be worth keeping or selling. The old man who'd helped me at the hardware store, George according to his name tag, had been friendly in that nosy small-town way. "You must be Linda's niece. Heard you were in town? News travels fast," I'd said. "Always does here. Your aunt was quite a character. Sorry for your loss." I started in the living room, opening windows to let in fresh air, wiping down surfaces, sorting through the obvious trash. Hours passed. The work was physical and mind-numbing. Exactly what I needed. By mid-afternoon, I'd filled 6 garbage bags with actual trash and started to make a small dent in the chaos. That's when Diane showed up. She didn't knock, just opened the front door and walked in like she owned the place. She was probably in her mid-50s, thin and tan with sun-damaged skin, and bleached blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore 2 tight jeans and a tank top that showed off her bony shoulders. "You must be Rebecca," she said, not waiting for confirmation. "I'm Diane Foster. I live 3 houses down. Was friends with your aunt?" "Nice to meet you," I said, though something about her made me immediately uncomfortable. She walked around the living room, picking up objects and putting them down, touching everything. Linda had quite the collection, didn't she? All this junk from her travels. Most of it's probably worthless, you know. She had more money than sense sometimes, buying tourist trap garbage. I'm just starting to go through everything. Listen, I'll save you some time. I'm actually in the market for some vintage furniture, and I know a guy who runs an estate sale company. We could probably clear this whole place out in a weekend, get you some cash, and you could be back to your real life. What do you say? I looked at her, at the calculating way she was assessing every item in the room, like she was already pricing them. "I need time to go through things first." "Suit yourself, but don't wait too long. Houses like this, sitting empty, they attract problems. Vandals, squatters, you know. This isn't exactly a high-security neighborhood. After she left, I locked the door behind her and felt a chill despite the warm day. There was something predatory about her, something that made me want to protect this house and its contents, even though I had no emotional attachment to any of it. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine. Wake up early at the motel, grab coffee from the local diner where the waitress, Martha, started remembering my order, drive to the house, and work until dark. The physical labor felt good. My back ached, my hands got calloused, and I was more exhausted than I'd been in years, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from actually doing something instead of just sitting in a cubicle. Martha became my first real connection in Harborside. She was in her late 50s, with gray hair she kept in a practical bun, and a warm smile that actually reached her eyes. On my third morning, she sat down at my booth during a quiet moment. "You doing okay out there at Linda's place?" she asked. "It's a lot to go through," I admitted. Linda was special. Used to come in here every Sunday morning for pancakes and coffee. She'd tell me stories about her travels. Made my life seem pretty small by comparison, but she never made me feel bad about it. She had this way of making you feel like your life mattered just as much as hers, you know? I wish I'd known her better. Martha patted my hand. She talked about you sometimes. Said you reminded her of herself when she was younger. Said you had potential, but were too scared to use it. Don't know if that's true, but that's what she said. Those words stayed with me as I worked. Had I been too scared? Was I still? I started to find interesting things as I dug deeper into the house. Photo albums filled with pictures of Aunt Linda in exotic locations. Always smiling, always surrounded by local people, never alone. There were hundreds of photos, maybe thousands. Linda in front of the Taj Mahal. Linda at a market in Marrakesh. Linda on a boat in Thailand. Linda laughing with a group of women in traditional dress somewhere I couldn't identify. In every single photo, she looked alive in a way I'd never felt in my entire life. I found journals too, leather-bound books filled with Linda's handwriting. I spent an entire afternoon reading through one from her trip to India in 1998. She wrote about the colors and smells, the poverty and wealth existing side by side, the spirituality that seemed to permeate everything. But she also wrote about herself, about her fears and doubts. Sometimes I wonder if I'm running away or running towards something. One entry read, "My sister thinks I'm wasting my life, that I should settle down, get married, have children like normal people do. But what's normal? Is it normal to wake up every day feeling like you're slowly disappearing? Is it normal to live someone else's idea of a good life instead of discovering your own? I don't have answers. I just know that when I'm traveling, when I'm meeting new people and experiencing new things, I feel real. I feel like me. And isn't that worth something?" I cried reading that entry, sitting on the dusty floor of Linda's living room, because I understood exactly what she meant. I'd been disappearing for years, maybe my whole adult life, and I hadn't even realized it until this moment. There were letters, too, dozens of them, in languages I couldn't read: French, Spanish, Thai, Arabic. Some had been translated, small notes in Linda's handwriting explaining who they were from. A woman named Amara from Morocco who'd taught Linda how to make traditional mint tea. A man named Somchai from Thailand who'd shown her his village and introduced her to his family. A couple named Jean and Marie from Paris who'd remained her friends for over 30 years. The fabrics and textiles were extraordinary. Silks from India in colors I didn't know existed. Wool blankets from Peru with geometric patterns that seemed to shimmer when the light hit them right. Batik from Indonesia, each piece clearly handmade with intricate designs. I spread them out across the furniture, transforming the dusty old house into something that looked like a museum or an art gallery. Small statues and carvings filled multiple boxes. Buddha figures in various poses, some brass, some stone, some wood. African masks that might have been ceremonial or decorative, I couldn't tell. Carved boxes from different countries, each one unique. Clay figurines that looked ancient. I handled each piece carefully, reverently, aware that I was touching objects that had meant something to Linda, that represented specific moments and memories. In one box, I found a collection of what looked like children's toys. Small wooden animals, hand-carved and painted. A note explained. These were being sold by a young boy in Guatemala to support his family. I bought all of them so he could go home early to his mother. He cried and hugged me. I cried too. Sometimes the smallest gestures mean the most. Each box I opened was like a window into a life I'd never known. A life of adventure and connection and experiences so far removed from my own existence that it felt like fiction. But it wasn't fiction. It was real. Linda had really lived this way, had really made these connections, had really experienced all of this. And for some reason, she'd chosen to leave it all to me. I found postcards too, hundreds of them, most never sent. On the back of each one, Linda had written notes to herself. Remember this moment. Remember how the light looked on the water. Remember the taste of the food. Remember the sound of the children laughing. Remember that you're alive. The more I discovered, the more I understood that Linda hadn't just been collecting objects. She'd been collecting proof of her existence, evidence that she'd been somewhere, done something, mattered to someone. In a way, this entire house was a monument to a life fully lived, and I was the unlikely curator of that legacy. On the 5th day, Diane showed up again. This time she brought a man with her, a big guy in his 40s with a beard and a backwards baseball cap. She introduced him as Kyle, her cousin. There was also a younger woman with them, early 20s, with blonde highlights and too much makeup. Diane introduced her as Brittany, Kyle's girlfriend. We were talking, and Kyle here, he's really good at hauling stuff. We could help you clear out some of these boxes, maybe take some of the furniture off your hands. Save you the trouble, Diane said, already walking through the living room like she owned the place. Brittany was taking photos with her phone. What are you doing? I asked Brittany. Just documenting, she said with a shrug. Diane said your aunt had some cool vintage stuff. I'm still going through everything, I said firmly, feeling my anxiety rise. There were 3 of them and 1 of me, and they were all acting like they had every right to be there. Come on, most of this stuff is trash. Your aunt was a hoarder, let's be honest. You're doing yourself a favor by getting rid of it, Diane said, picking up a carved wooden box from India. Like this. What even is this? Probably worth $5 at a yard sale. I took the box from her hands. Please don't touch anything. Kyle was in the corner, looking at the textiles I'd spread out. Some of this fabric might be worth something. I know a guy who buys vintage stuff. Could probably take it all off your hands for a few $100. I'm not selling anything right now. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Kyle and I were trying to help you out here, Diane said, her voice taking on an edge. You don't know anything about this town or these items. You need local expertise. I appreciate the offer, but no thank you. And I need all of you to leave. Now. Kyle stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. He was a big man, probably 220 pounds, and he used his size deliberately. Listen, lady, Diane's being nice, but this is a small town, and people talk. People know this place is full of stuff, and Linda's not here to protect it anymore. You might want to think about accepting some help. For your own safety. Something in me snapped. All those years of being quiet Rebecca, accommodating Rebecca, invisible Rebecca, they suddenly felt like a waste. I stepped forward, matching his stance, refusing to be intimidated even though my heart was pounding. Get out of this house now and don't come back. Diane laughed, but it was a forced sound. You're going to regret this. We're the only friends you have in this town. That's a threat? It's a warning. This house, sitting out here all alone, full of valuable things with just you inside? Bad things happen in small towns to people who don't know how to be neighborly. Come on, Kyle, Brittany, let's go. As they walked out, Brittany turned back and gave me a look that was pure calculation. She doesn't know what she has. That's obvious. After they left, my hands were shaking. I locked all the doors and windows, checked them twice, then called Theodore again. They brought people to intimidate me, I told him. 3 of them. They were taking photos. Did they threaten you directly? They implied that bad things could happen if I didn't cooperate with them. Theodore, I'm scared. His voice became more serious. Listen to me carefully, Rebecca. If you found anything of significant value, you need to tell me now. Because if these people suspect there's something worth stealing, you could be in real danger. I hesitated, then told him about the jewelry I'd found. His silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Rebecca, you need to leave that house tonight. Go back to the motel. Tomorrow morning, first thing, I'm arranging for security and professional appraisers. Don't tell anyone else what you found. Not the police, not neighbors, nobody. Do you understand? Yes. That night at the motel, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. I kept thinking about the trunk in the basement, about those beautiful pieces of jewelry, about Diane's calculating eyes. At 2 a.m, I drove back to the house in the dark, let myself in quietly, and moved the trunk from the basement to the master bedroom closet, hiding it under blankets and old clothes. It probably didn't make it any safer, but it made me feel slightly better. The next morning, Martha noticed my exhaustion when I came in for coffee. Honey, you look terrible. Everything okay? I wanted to confide in her, Wanted to tell someone what was happening, but Theodore's warning echoed in my head. Just not sleeping well. The house is strange at night. You know, Linda used to say this town had changed over the years. Said some people got too focused on money, forgot about what really mattered. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but I think I do now. She lowered her voice. Be careful around Diane. She's always looking for an angle, always trying to get something for nothing. Her family's been that way for generations. Thank you, Martha. She patted my hand. If you need anything, real help, you call me. I know this town. Know who you can trust and who you can't. I spent that day photographing everything in the house, documenting Linda's collection with my phone camera. If something happened, if someone broke in, I wanted proof of what had been there. I took hundreds of photos, capturing every angle of every object. Around noon, I saw Diane's car drive by slowly. Then again, an hour later. She was watching the house, watching me. The feeling of being surveilled was oppressive, made worse by the isolation of the coastal location. The nearest neighbor besides Diane was half a mile away. After they left, I called Theodore, the lawyer. The neighbors are making me uncomfortable, I told him. Is there any security system for the house? Not that I'm aware of, but given the value of the estate, you might want to consider one. Though honestly, Miss Hartley, most of what's in that house is sentimental value at best. The real value is the property itself. After we hung up, I decided to stay at the house instead of the motel. It felt safer somehow, being here, protecting whatever it was that Linda had left behind. I found blankets in a closet upstairs, made up the bed in the master bedroom, and that night I slept in my aunt's house for the first time. The next morning, I woke up determined to finish going through the main floor before I started on the upstairs rooms. I'd been avoiding the basement, which looked dark and uninviting, but I couldn't put it off forever. The basement stairs creaked under my weight. The light bulb at the bottom was weak, casting more shadows than illumination. The space was damp and smelled like earth and old wood. More boxes, naturally, but also old furniture, what looked like painting supplies, and in the far corner, under a heavy tarp, something large. I pulled the tarp off and found an old steamer trunk, the kind people used to take on ocean voyages. It was covered in stickers and stamps from dozens of countries, the metal fittings rusty but intact. There was a padlock on it, old and heavy. I tried the keys Theodore had given me, but none of them fit. I considered breaking the lock, but something made me hesitate. This felt important, like Linda had locked it for a reason. I spent the rest of that day searching the house for a key. I went through drawers, looked in coat pockets, checked inside books. Nothing. Finally, as the sun was setting, I found a small wooden box on the top shelf of Linda's bedroom closet, pushed so far back I'd missed it before. Inside the box was a tarnished silver key, along with a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was in Linda's handwriting, dated 8 months before her death. My dearest Rebecca, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found your way to my little house by the sea. I'm glad. Of all the people in our family, I always thought you were the one who understood, even if you didn't know it yet. You had that same look in your eyes that I recognized, that hunger for something more, that feeling of being trapped in a life that doesn't quite fit. I know what your mother told you about me, that I was irresponsible, that I wasted my life chasing fantasies. Maybe she was right, in her way. But I lived, Rebecca. I truly lived. Every day was an adventure. Every person I met taught me something. Every place I visited changed me. And yes, I collected things along the way, not because they were valuable, but because they reminded me of moments when I felt most alive. In the basement, there's a trunk. Inside that trunk is everything that matters. Not money, though there is some of that. Not jewels, though there are some of those too. What matters is the story, the journey, the proof that a life lived fully is never wasted. The combination of people in this town might try to convince you that what's in that trunk is worthless, that it's just more junk from a crazy old woman. Don't listen to them. What's in that trunk is worth more than they could possibly understand, but not for the reasons they'd think. The key will open the lock. What you do with what's inside is up to you. You can sell it, keep it, or throw it away. But before you decide, I want you to understand something. I left this all to you not because you're family, though you are, but because I saw in you the possibility of becoming who you were meant to be instead of who everyone expected you to be. The question is, do you have the courage to do it? All my love, Aunt Linda. I sat on the floor of her bedroom, tears streaming down my face, reading the letter 3 more times. Then I took the key and went down to the basement, The key fit perfectly. The lock opened with a satisfying click. I lifted the heavy lid of the trunk, my heart pounding, not knowing what I'd find. The smell that wafted out was cedar and age and something sweet I couldn't identify. The trunk was packed carefully, layers wrapped in cloth and tissue paper. I started unwrapping items one by one, setting them carefully on the basement floor. Jewelry. Not costume jewelry, but pieces that even my untrained eye could tell were significant. Necklaces with stones that caught the dim light and threw rainbows across the concrete floor. Bracelets of worked gold and silver, intricate and beautiful. Earrings, rings, brooches, each piece wrapped individually, each with a small tag in Linda's handwriting describing where she'd gotten it and why. Bangkok, 1993. Traded my watch for this. The woman said it was blessed by monks. Marrakesh, 2001. Bought this from a street vendor who needed money for his daughter's medicine. Istanbul, 1988. A gift from someone special. Wore it once. There were dozens of pieces, maybe more. Layer after layer, each more beautiful than the last. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a heavy velvet cloth, was a necklace that made me gasp out loud. It was clearly old, the metalwork elaborate, with a large central stone that, even in the poor light of the basement, seemed to glow from within. The tag on this one said simply, "Worth more than you think. Have it appraised. Use it to build a life that's yours." My hands were shaking. This couldn't be real. Could it? I carefully packed everything back into the trunk, locked it, and carried the key upstairs with me. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing. If these pieces were real, if they were valuable, what did that mean? What was I supposed to do? The next morning, I drove 2 hours to Portland to find a reputable jewelry appraiser. I'd taken just 3 pieces with me, afraid to carry more, afraid this was all some kind of dream or mistake. The appraiser was a woman named Ellen Chen, middle-aged and professional, with a small shop in a nice part of town. She looked at the pieces I'd brought with a loupe, made some notes, consulted some books in her computer. "Where did you get these?" she asked finally. "They belong to my aunt. She traveled extensively. These are significant pieces. This one," she pointed to a bracelet, "is Thai, probably early 20th century. The workmanship is exceptional. This necklace appears to be North African, and these stones are genuine emeralds. Not large enough to be extraordinarily valuable individually, but the piece as a whole is exquisite. What are they worth? I'd need to examine them more carefully, but this bracelet alone, I'd estimate $15,000 to $20,000 at auction. The necklace, maybe $30,000. And you said there are more pieces?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You need to have the entire collection appraised and insured immediately. If these are representative of the quality of the other pieces, you're looking at a very significant estate." I drove back to Harborside in a daze. $30,000 for one necklace. And there were dozens of pieces in that trunk, maybe more than 100. The number was incomprehensible. When I got back to the house, Diane was waiting on the front porch. She stood up as I got out of my car. "Been trying to call you," she said. "Wanted to apologize for Kyle the other day. He can be a bit intense." "It's fine," I said, trying to get past her to the door. "Look, I feel bad about how things went. Let me make it up to you. I actually know quite a bit about antiques and collectibles. I could help you sort through Linda's stuff, maybe give you a sense of what's valuable and what's not. I appreciate that, but I've got it handled." She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Have you been through everything? Found anything interesting?" I pulled my arm away. "Diane, I need you to leave. I'm trying to help you. Linda and we were close. She would have wanted me to look out for you. If you were so close, why did she leave everything to me and not you?" Her face flushed red. "You ungrateful little bitch. You come here. You don't know anything about Linda or this town or what we've done to keep this property from falling apart while she was rotting away in that home. And you think you can just swoop in and get off my property. Now, your property? You think this is yours? You think you deserve any of this?" I took out my phone. "I'm calling the police." She laughed, harsh and bitter. "Go ahead. Chief Morrison and I went to high school together. But fine, I'm leaving. But you should know, people in this town talk, and accidents happen to people who aren't careful." After she drove away, I did call the police, not Chief Morrison, but the state police, and filed a report about harassment. The officer who took my statement was professional and concerned, told me to call immediately if Diane or anyone else bothered me again, but I could see in his eyes that he thought I was overreacting, just another out-of-towner who didn't understand how things worked in small communities. That night, I heard someone trying to break into the house. I was upstairs in bed, exhausted but unable to truly relax, when I heard the first sound, a scraping noise, metal on wood, coming from downstairs. My heart stopped. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's trying to break into my house, I whispered. I'm at 27 Shore Road in Harborside. Are you alone in the residence? Yes, I can hear them downstairs. They're trying to open a window. Stay on the line. I'm dispatching officers now. Do you have a place to hide? I'm in the master bedroom upstairs. There's a closet. Get in the closet, stay quiet, stay on the line with me. I grabbed the brass candlestick from Linda's nightstand, the heaviest object I could find, and went to the closet where I'd hidden the trunk. I climbed in, pulled the door mostly closed, and sat there in the dark with my phone pressed to my ear and that candlestick gripped in my other hand. The sounds continued. Breaking glass. Footsteps. More than one person. Voices, muffled but definitely multiple people. They were inside the house. They're inside, I whispered to the dispatcher. Officers are 3 minutes away. Stay hidden. Do not confront them. I heard someone coming up the stairs. Heavy footsteps, a man. Then a woman's voice. Check the bedrooms. She said Linda kept the good stuff upstairs. It was Diane's voice. I was sure of it. The footsteps moved down the hall, checking the other bedroom first. Doors opening, things being moved. Then footsteps approaching the master bedroom. I held my breath, gripped the candlestick tighter. The bedroom door opened. Footsteps inside. Someone was going through drawers, the sound of furniture being moved. Then the closet door flew open, and I found myself face to face with Kyle, Diane's cousin. He looked shocked to see me there. I screamed and swung the candlestick as hard as I could, catching him in the shoulder. He yelled in pain and stumbled backward. "She's here! The crazy bitch is here!" he shouted. I heard sirens then, close and getting closer. Kyle and whoever else was with him ran. I heard their footsteps pounding down the stairs, a door slamming. Then silence except for the sirens. The police arrived quickly, this time local officers including Chief Morrison himself. I was still sitting in the closet, shaking, when they found me. A young officer, probably mid-20s, helped me stand up. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" "No, but I hit one of them with this," I said, still holding the candlestick. They searched the house, found the broken window where the intruders had entered, took statements. Chief Morrison examined the scene with an expression that suggested this was all somehow my fault. "Did you see who it was?" he asked. I heard Diane Foster's voice. "And I saw Kyle, her cousin, when he opened the closet door." The chief's expression hardened. "You're accusing Diane Foster of breaking and entering?" "I'm not accusing. I'm telling you what I saw and heard. That's a serious allegation. Diane's lived here her whole life. She's a respected member of this community. She broke into my house. Do you have proof? Did you see her face?" I heard her voice clearly, and I saw Kyle. The young officer who'd helped me out of the closet spoke up. "Chief, there's definitely signs of forced entry, and the victim seems pretty shaken up." "I can see that, Officer Bennett. But without positive visual identification, we can't just go arresting people based on what someone thinks they heard." I felt my anger rising. "So someone breaks into my house. I hear them say Diane's name, see one of her relatives, and you're telling me there's nothing you can do. I'm telling you that I need evidence. I'll send someone to talk to Diane and Kyle tomorrow, ask them where they were tonight. But unless you saw Diane's face, it's just your word against theirs." After they left, Officer Bennett lingered behind. He waited until the chief's car pulled away, then came back to the door. "Miss Hartley, off the record, you need to be careful. The chief and Diane, they go way back. High school sweethearts, actually. Didn't work out, but they're still close. If you're serious about this, you might want to contact the state police instead of relying on local law enforcement. Thank you for telling me that. For what it's worth, I believe you. We've had complaints about Diane before, but they always seem to disappear. She's got connections. Just watch your back." I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, jumping at every sound, that candlestick still in my hand. As soon as the sun came up, I called Theodore. After they left, I knew I needed help. Real help. I called Theodore, and to his credit, he took me seriously. "This is more complex than I initially thought," he said. "If you've discovered items of significant value, and if people in town suspect that, you could be in danger. I'm going to recommend you hire private security and expedite the appraisal process. We need to get everything documented and secured as quickly as possible." Within 2 days, Theodore had arranged for a team from a Boston auction house to come to Harborside. 3 experts, accompanied by a security team of 4 armed guards, arrived in 2 black SUVs. The neighbors definitely noticed. I saw curtains moving in windows, including Diane's. The head appraiser was a distinguished older man named Richard Pemberton, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and an air of old money sophistication. With him were two younger experts, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in Asian antiquities and jewelry, and a man named Marcus Levine, who focused on textiles and ethnographic objects. They spent the first day just cataloging, walking through the house with cameras and tablets, making notes, conferring with each other in low voices. I made coffee and tried to stay out of their way, but I was desperately curious about their reactions. Dr. Chen was in the living room examining the textiles I'd spread out when she called me over. "Miss Hartley, can you tell me anything about the provenance of these pieces?" "Just what was in my aunt's notes. She bought them during her travels." She held up a large piece of batik. "This is Indonesian, probably from Central Java. The technique and pattern suggest it's at least 80 to 100 years old. Museum quality, really. And this," she moved to a silk piece, "is Thai silk, probably from the Jim Thompson collection. Your aunt had exceptional taste. Is it valuable?" "That depends on how you define valuable. Monetarily? Each of these textiles could fetch anywhere from $500 to $5,000, depending on condition and rarity. But the cultural and historical value is much greater. These pieces represent dying traditions, crafts that are disappearing from the world." Marcus Levine spent hours with the masks and carvings. He was younger, probably early 40s, with an intense focus that reminded me of a detective examining evidence. "Your aunt traveled extensively in Africa," he said, more statement than question. "Yes, she spent several years there in the 80s and 90s. These masks, they're not tourist pieces. They're authentic ceremonial objects. This one," he held up an elaborate mask with horns and cowrie shells, "is Yoruba, from Nigeria. It would have been used in religious ceremonies. The fact that she acquired it legally and ethically is significant. There are provenance notes?" "Yes, she kept detailed records." "Good. That increases the value considerably. Without provenance, pieces like this can't be sold legally in many markets. With proper documentation, we're looking at 10 to 15,000 per mask, possibly more for the rarer examples." But it was the jewelry that caused the real excitement. On the second day, after the security team had thoroughly swept the house and established a perimeter, I took Richard Pemberton down to the basement and showed him the trunk. He put on white cotton gloves before touching anything. Then he opened the trunk, and I watched his face change. His professional composure slipped for just a moment, revealing pure amazement. "Dear God," he whispered. He began removing pieces, one by one, laying them out on a white cloth he'd brought with him. Dr. Chen joined him, and the two of them worked in near silence for over an hour, examining each piece with loupes and special lights, taking photographs, making notes. Finally, Richard looked up at me. "Miss Hartley, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a collection of jewelry. This is a significant anthropological and artistic collection that represents decades of careful, knowledgeable acquisition. Your aunt wasn't just buying pretty things. She was collecting pieces with historical and cultural significance." "I don't understand." Dr. Chen picked up a necklace. "This is Thai, probably late 19th century. The workmanship is exceptional. The stones are genuine sapphires and rubies, but more importantly, the piece itself represents a specific regional style that's rarely seen outside of museums. The metalwork alone is extraordinary." Richard held up another piece. "This is North African, probably Moroccan, possibly Berber in origin. The design elements suggest it's at least 150 years old. The silver is high quality, the stones are natural emeralds and turquoise. This isn't costume jewelry, Rebecca. These are significant historical artifacts that happen to also be beautiful jewelry." They continued like this for hours, each piece revealing new stories, new connections, new evidence of Linda's incredible eye and knowledge. A bracelet from India that had belonged to a Maharaja's family. Earrings from Turkey that dated back to the Ottoman Empire. A brooch from Egypt that incorporated ancient techniques of metalwork that had been nearly lost. And then, at the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in that heavy velvet cloth, Richard found the black opal necklace. He unwrapped it slowly, reverently. Even in the dim light of the basement, the stones seemed to glow with an inner fire. The opal itself was enormous, the size of a small egg, with flashes of blue and green and purple dancing across its dark surface. The setting was elaborate goldwork, clearly European, with smaller diamonds surrounding the central stone. "This," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this is extraordinary." Dr. Chen leaned in close with her loupe. Natural black opal, probably from Australia. The fire in this stone is remarkable. And that setting, that's 18th century European gold work. French, maybe, or Italian. The craftsmanship is museum level. How much? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Richard looked at me seriously. I need to have this examined by a specialist, but based on my initial assessment, $2 million, possibly more to the right collector. I sat down heavily on the basement floor. $2 million for one necklace. But it's not just about the monetary value, Richard continued. This piece represents a convergence of Australian natural resources, European craftsmanship, and your aunt's extraordinary ability to recognize and acquire important pieces. The story of how she found it, where it came from, that's part of what makes it valuable. I pulled out Linda's tag on the piece. It read simply, Sydney, 2003. The shop owner said it had been in his family for generations. He was selling it to pay for his daughter's cancer treatment. I paid 3 times what he was asking, worth more than you think. Have it appraised. Use it to build a life that's yours. Richard read the note, then nodded slowly. Your aunt was a remarkable woman. She understood that true value isn't just in the object itself, but in the human connections and stories that surround it. Over the next 3 days, the team cataloged everything. The final inventory was staggering. 147 pieces of jewelry, ranging from modest silver bracelets to that extraordinary black opal necklace. 73 textiles, each one unique and significant. 42 masks and carvings from various African cultures. 23 Buddha statues and religious objects from Southeast Asia. Dozens of carved boxes, ceramic pieces, and small artworks. Hundreds of photographs, each one documenting Linda's travels and connections, and the journals, letters, and personal papers that told the story of it all. On the final evening, Richard asked to speak with me privately. The security team had just loaded everything into an armored truck for transport to Boston. We sat in Linda's living room, now empty of all those treasures, just the dusty furniture remaining. Miss Hartley, your aunt's collection is extraordinary. Not because any single piece is museum quality, though several certainly are, but because of the breadth and cultural significance of the collection as a whole. She had an eye for authentic pieces and a clear appreciation for craftsmanship. The jewelry alone, we estimate, is worth approximately $3 million. I sat down heavily. $3 million? That's a conservative estimate. At the right auction, with the right buyers, it could be significantly more. Some of these pieces are rare examples of regional craftsmanship that collectors would pay premium prices for. And that's just the jewelry. The textiles, the art objects, some of the furniture, we're still finalizing the catalog, but I'd estimate the entire estate, excluding the property itself, at somewhere between $5 and $6 million. I couldn't speak, couldn't process it. $6 million. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck, eating ramen for dinner half the time, driving a car held together by rust and hope, and Aunt Linda had been sitting on $6 million in jewelry and art. There's something else, Richard continued. That black opal necklace. We had a specialist examine it via video call. The stone is even rarer than we initially thought. It's a natural black opal with exceptional fire, and the setting is confirmed 18th century French gold work. That piece alone could sell for upwards of $2 million to the right collector. Possibly $2.5 million if we time the auction correctly and generate enough interest. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That depends on what you want. We can auction the collection, which would take several months but would likely get you top dollar. We'd need to prepare proper catalogs, reach out to known collectors, generate interest in the collecting community, or we can arrange for private sales, which would be faster but potentially less lucrative. Or you can keep it all, though I'd strongly recommend proper insurance and security if you choose that route. How long would an auction take? For a collection of this significance, we'd want to do it properly. 3 to 4 months of preparation, then the auction itself. We'd probably divide it into several smaller auctions, actually. The jewelry would be one event, the textiles and ethnographic objects another, the smaller pieces a third. That way, each category gets the attention it deserves and doesn't overwhelm buyers. And if I wanted to keep some pieces, the ones with the best stories? He smiled. That's entirely your right. Many collectors do that. Keep the pieces with the most personal significance, sell the rest. I'd recommend selecting maybe 10 to 15 pieces to keep, enough to honor your aunt's memory without the burden of managing such a large collection. That night, I sat in the empty house and read through Linda's journals again. I looked at the photographs of her in all those exotic locations, always smiling, always connected to the people around her. I thought about the tags she'd written for each piece of jewelry, the human stories behind each acquisition, and I thought about her question, did I have the courage to become who I was meant to be instead of who everyone expected me to be? Over the next week, things happened quickly. Theodore arranged for everything to be moved to a secure facility in Boston. The auction house began preparing catalogs. I gave interviews to their marketing team about Aunt Linda and her travels, helping them craft the story that would sell the collection. And I started to make plans. I called Mr. Patterson and quit my job. He was shocked, tried to convince me to reconsider, to at least finish out the month. I politely declined. I called my landlord and gave notice on my apartment. I contacted a real estate agent about selling my few pieces of furniture. Then I did something I'd been too afraid to do for years. I went back to Philadelphia, to Marcus's parents' house where he was temporarily staying before his move to California. I knocked on the door, and when he answered, I looked him straight in the eye. I need you to sign the final divorce papers. I've been putting it off, and so have you, but it's time. Rebecca, I've been meaning to call you. Jennifer and we broke up. I've been thinking maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we could… No, sign the papers. Can we at least talk about it? There's nothing to talk about. You wanted out 3 years ago. You left. Now I'm leaving too. Leaving? Where are you going? I don't know yet. That's the point. He signed the papers. I had them notarized that same day. The auction was scheduled for mid-December, 3 months away. Theodore suggested I stay involved in the process, meet with potential buyers, be present for the preview events. It would help drive interest, he said, having the niece there to tell Linda's stories. So I spent 3 months living in Boston, in a temporary apartment the auction house helped me find, learning about my aunt's collection, and in the process, learning about my aunt. Each piece had a story. Each purchase represented a moment in time, a connection made, an adventure undertaken. I met collectors who'd known Linda, who'd bought from her over the years or traded with her. They told me stories of a woman who was generous and curious, who loved people and experiences more than things, who'd only started seriously collecting in her later years when her health began to fail and travel became difficult. She told me once, an elderly collector named James Rothschild said at one of the preview events, that she was gathering treasures not for herself, but for whoever came after her. She said she wanted to leave proof that a life lived on one's own terms was possible. The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the harbor and stood looking out at the water, thinking about everything that had happened. 4 months ago, I'd been invisible Rebecca, accounting drone, ex-wife, nobody special. Now I was about to become wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined possible. But the money wasn't what kept me awake. It was the question Linda had posed in her letter. Did I have the courage to become who I was meant to be instead of who everyone expected me to be? The auction was spectacular. Wealthy collectors from around the world, either in person or bidding remotely, competing for pieces of Linda's collection. The energy in the room was electric. I watched as item after item sold for prices that seemed impossible. The black opal necklace, the crown jewel of the collection, sold for $2.3 million to a private collector in Dubai. When it was over, Richard found me in the crowd and shook my hand. Congratulations, Miss Hartley. Final totals will take a few days, but preliminary numbers suggest just over $6 million after fees and commissions. $6 million. I'd never even imagined having $6 million. But even as I smiled and accepted congratulations from people I barely knew, I felt a strange emptiness. This money, this windfall, it came from Linda's life, from her courage and curiosity and willingness to live differently. What was I going to do with it? Go back to an accounting job? Buy a nice house in the suburbs? Invest it safely and live off the interest? That night, back in my temporary apartment, I found another envelope tucked into one of Linda's photo albums, one I'd been looking through to help the auction house with provenance information. It was addressed to me, dated just a month before she'd gone into the care facility. Rebecca, it read, I have one more gift for you, but this one you have to give yourself. The money from selling my treasures will give you freedom, but only if you're brave enough to use it for freedom rather than just security. Travel. Learn. Meet people who challenge you. Do things that scare you. Fall in love with life the way I did. Or don't. You can take the money and build a safe, comfortable life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you do, please know it's a choice you're making, not something that's happening to you. We all have the power to choose our lives, Rebecca. Most people just forget that, or get too scared to do it. Don't be most people. All my love, always Linda. I read it 3 times, then 4. Then I opened my laptop and started searching for flights. 6 months later, I was in Thailand, staying in a small guest house in Chiang Mai. I'd been traveling since January, slowly at first, just dipping my toes into adventure. A week in Paris, where I'd visited the Louvre 3 times and cried in front of paintings that Linda had written about in her journals. 2 weeks in Spain, where I'd taken flamenco lessons and learned that I had no sense of rhythm but didn't care. Then, growing bolder, a month in Morocco. Morocco had been transformative. I'd found the shop where Linda had bought that Berber necklace, still run by the same family. The grandson of the original owner remembered Linda, told me stories about her visits, her curiosity, her respect for their traditions. He'd invited me to his home for dinner, and I'd sat on cushions on the floor with his family, eating couscous with my hands and listening to stories in broken English and gestures. "Your aunt, she was special," he'd said. "She didn't just buy things. She wanted to understand where they came from, what they meant, who made them. She saw people, not just products." From Morocco, I'd gone to Egypt, where I hired a guide named Amina, a woman my age who ran her own tour company despite her family's objections. She'd taken me to all the tourist sites, but also to her grandmother's village, to markets where locals shopped, to places tourists never saw. We'd become friends, staying up late talking about our lives, our fears, our dreams. "You're brave," Amina had told me one evening as we sat on her apartment balcony, watching the sun set over Cairo. "To leave everything, to travel alone. I want to do that, but I'm scared." "I'm scared too," I'd admitted. "Every single day. But I'm more scared of waking up 20 years from now and realizing I never tried." Then 3 weeks hiking in Nepal, an experience that had pushed me physically and mentally. I'd joined a group trek to base camp, something the old Rebecca would never have even considered. The altitude made every step difficult, my lungs burning, my legs aching. Several times I'd wanted to quit, to turn back, but I'd kept going. When I finally reached base camp and saw Everest up close, I'd cried. Not because of the mountain, but because I'd proven something to myself. I was capable of more than I'd ever believed. Thailand was different. Softer, gentler. After the intensity of Nepal, I needed time to just exist, to breathe, to process everything I'd experienced. Chiang Mai felt right, with its ancient temples and night markets and the smell of street food that made my stomach growl. I'd met people, made friends, had conversations that lasted all night. A couple from Australia, Emma and Jake, who were traveling for a year before going home to start a family. A solo traveler from Germany named Klaus, who was 65 and finally living the life he'd postponed while building a career. A group of Thai university students who'd adopted me one night at a bar and taught me drinking games I couldn't follow but laughed at anyway. I'd tried foods I couldn't pronounce and gotten lost in cities where I didn't speak the language. I'd been scared and lonely and uncomfortable, and I'd never felt more alive. Every experience, good and bad, felt like it was chiseling away the old Rebecca, revealing someone new underneath, someone braver, more curious, more willing to take risks. In Chiang Mai, I'd signed up for that cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. The instructor was Niran, probably in her 60s, with laugh lines around her eyes and hands that moved with practiced grace as she showed us how to prepare curry paste. The class was small, just 6 of us, and Niran had a way of making everyone feel capable even when we clearly weren't. "Cooking is like life," she'd said as we pounded chilies and garlic in mortars. "Sometimes spicy, sometimes sweet. Always better when you share it with others." During a break, she'd asked me why I was traveling alone. I'd told her about Linda, about the inheritance, about the challenge to live differently. She'd smiled in a way that suggested she understood completely. "Your aunt was wise. Most people, they inherit money and they buy things. They think things will make them happy. But your aunt, she knew that experiences, connections, these are what matter. She left you money, yes, but more importantly, she left you permission." "Did you always know that?" I asked. "No. I learned it. I was married young, had children, did what was expected. Good wife, good mother, never complained. When my husband died, I was 50 years old, and I realized I had no idea who I was without him. I knew how to cook his favorite foods, how to fold his shirts the way he liked, how to be quiet when he was tired. But me? Who was I? I didn't know. What did you do?" I started learning, took classes, traveled when I could, taught myself to cook professionally. My children thought I was crazy. 50 years old, starting a new life, but I did it anyway. Started this business at 55. Now I am 63, and for the first time in my life, I am happy. Not because someone else is happy with me, but because I am happy with myself. Now, I am me. As I practiced rolling spring rolls under her patient instruction, sauce dripping everywhere, rice paper tearing, I thought about who I'd been 6 months ago and who I was becoming. I thought about Diane back in Harborside, so consumed with trying to get what she thought was valuable that she couldn't see what actually mattered. I thought about Marcus, always chasing the next thing, the next woman, the next life, never satisfied with the one he had. And I thought about Linda, collecting treasures not because she loved objects, but because they reminded her of moments when she'd felt most fully herself. Each piece of jewelry, each textile, each carved mask, they weren't valuable because they cost money. They were valuable because they represented connection, experience, life truly lived. That evening, after class, I walked through the night market in the old city. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of grilling meat. Vendors called out in Thai, their voices creating a symphony of commerce and community. Tourists and locals moved through the narrow lanes, everyone hunting for something, though I suspected most of us didn't know exactly what. I stopped at a stall selling handmade jewelry, silver work delicate and beautiful. An elderly woman sat behind the display, her hands working a piece of silver wire even as she watched for customers. Her fingers moved with the practiced ease of decades, creating beauty almost unconsciously. I picked up a bracelet, simple but elegant, with a small turquoise stone set in silver. It reminded me of Linda's first necklace, the one from Mexico City that had started everything. "How much?" I asked. She held up 5 fingers. 500 baht, about $15. Probably more than it was worth, probably the tourist price. But I didn't care. It wasn't about the money. The woman wrapped it carefully in tissue paper, then paused and looked at me with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "First purchase?" she asked in broken English. "First of many," I said. She smiled and nodded as if I'd said something profound. "Good. Things are just things. But memories, these stay forever." I wore that bracelet every day after that. Not because it was valuable, but because it reminded me of the moment I decided to truly start living. It became my touchstone, something I'd touch when I was scared or uncertain, a physical reminder that I was capable of choosing my own path. From Thailand, I went to Vietnam. I'd planned to stay 2 weeks but ended up staying 6. I rented a small apartment in Hanoi, in the Old Quarter, where the streets were barely wide enough for the motorcycles that dominated traffic. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of vendors selling soup and bread, their calls echoing through the narrow lanes. I took a Vietnamese language class at a community center, sitting in a room with teenagers who were much better students than I was. The teacher, a woman named Lynn, was patient with my terrible pronunciation and tendency to mix up tones. After class, she'd sometimes take me to her favorite cafes, places tourists never found, where we'd sit on plastic stools and drink incredibly strong coffee while she told me about her life. "My parents want me to marry," she'd said one afternoon. "They have someone picked out. He's fine, I guess. Good job, good family. But I don't love him. And they think I'm crazy for caring about that. They say love comes later, after marriage. But I see how they are together, my parents. They're not happy. They're just existing together. I don't want that. So what are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I'm learning from you, Rebecca. You left everything to discover yourself. That's brave. Maybe I need to be brave too." I'd traveled south through Vietnam, taking trains and buses, staying in guest houses and small hotels. In Hoi An, I'd learned to make lanterns from a woman who'd been doing it for 40 years. In Hue, I'd visited ancient temples and felt the weight of history pressing down. In Saigon, I'd gotten hopelessly lost and ended up having dinner with a family who'd found me wandering their neighborhood, looking confused. Cambodia came next. The temples of Angkor Wat took my breath away. Not just for their beauty, but for what they represented. Human ambition and artistry, preserved through centuries. I'd hired a guide named Sophia, who'd survived the Khmer Rouge as a child, and who now dedicated his life to making sure people remembered that history. "We must remember," he'd said as we walked through the temples. "Not to hold hate, but to prevent it from happening again." Your aunt, she understood this, I think. She collected things from many cultures, yes? She understood that we are all connected, all human. The things that divide us are small. The things that unite us are much bigger. I'd volunteered at an elephant sanctuary outside Siem Reap for 3 weeks. The work was hard, physical, cleaning enclosures and preparing food and learning about the elephants and their individual personalities. But it was also joyful, being around these magnificent animals, helping in some small way to give them better lives after years of abuse in the tourism industry. One of the volunteers, a young woman named Suki from Japan, became my friend. She was 24, traveling alone for the first time, defying her parents who'd wanted her to take a traditional path. We'd talk late into the night, sharing our fears and dreams. "My mother thinks I'm wasting my life," Suki had said. "She says I should be home, finding a husband, starting a family. But I'm not ready for that. I want to experience the world first. I want to know who I am before I become someone's wife, someone's mother. Is that selfish?" "No," I told her. "It's honest. And honesty is the opposite of selfish. Pretending to be something you're not, that's what causes real harm." From Cambodia, I'd gone to Japan with Suki. She'd invited me to meet her family, despite their disapproval of her travels. Her parents had been polite but clearly confused by me, this older American woman who was apparently encouraging their daughter's rebellion. But Suki's grandmother, a woman in her 80s who spoke no English, had taken my hands and looked into my eyes and smiled. Through Suki's translation, she'd said, "You remind me of me when I was young. I wanted to be a painter, but my family said no. Women didn't do that then. I married, had children, did what was expected, but I always wondered what might have been." Don't let Suki have those regrets. Help her be brave. I'd spent 2 months in Japan, mostly in Kyoto, studying tea ceremony, and trying to understand a culture so different from my own. The precision, the attention to every small detail, the way even simple actions became meditation when done with proper attention. It was humbling and beautiful and frustrating all at once. Through all of this, through all these months and miles and experiences, I was changing. Not dramatically, not like a movie montage transformation, but gradually, almost imperceptibly. I was more confident, more comfortable with uncertainty, more willing to try things even if I might fail. I laughed more easily. I talked to strangers without fear. I made decisions without second-guessing myself into paralysis. The old Rebecca, the one who'd worked in that gray cubicle and microwaved her dinners and disappeared into reruns, she was still there somewhere. But she was wrapped in layers now, like one of Linda's treasured pieces wrapped carefully in tissue paper. She was part of my history, but she wasn't my future. Over the next year, I kept traveling. I spent a month in Vietnam, 2 weeks in Cambodia, 3 months exploring Japan. I took classes in photography, pottery, and language. I volunteered at an elephant sanctuary in Thailand and taught English at a school in rural India. I made friends from dozens of countries, people who challenged my assumptions and expanded my worldview. I still had most of the money Linda had left me, invested safely and generating enough passive income that I didn't need to work if I didn't want to. But I started doing some consulting work anyway, helping small businesses with their accounting remotely, because I found I actually missed using that part of my brain. The difference was, now it was on my terms, when and how I wanted. I went back to Maine once, to Harborside, to see Linda's house. Theodore had arranged for it to be rented to a young couple with 2 kids, teachers who'd moved to the area for work. They'd fixed it up, painted it, planted a garden. It looked loved again. I drove past Diane's house, but I didn't stop. I heard later from Martha at the diner that Diane had moved away, something about financial problems and legal troubles. I felt a twinge of sadness for her, for how consumed she'd been with trying to take something that was never hers. On my way out of town, I stopped at Linda's grave. It was in a small cemetery overlooking the ocean, a simple headstone with her name and dates. I placed flowers on the grave and stood there for a long time, listening to the waves. "Thank you," I said out loud, "for seeing who I could be when I couldn't see it myself, for giving me not just the means but the permission to live differently. I hope I'm making you proud." The wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the ocean, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard laughter. 2 years after opening that trunk in Linda's basement, I found myself in a small cafe in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'd been in South America for 3 months, learning Spanish, dancing tango badly but enthusiastically, and working on a photography project documenting street artists. A man sat down at the table next to mine, late 40s, graying hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was sketching in a notebook, completely absorbed in his work. When the waiter brought his coffee, he looked up and caught my eye. He smiled. "Beautiful day," he said in English with a British accent. "It is," I agreed. "I'm David," he said. "I noticed your camera. Photographer?" "Amateur," I said. "Learning as I go. I'm Rebecca." We talked for an hour, then 2. He was an architect taking a sabbatical year to travel and work on personal projects. He'd left a successful firm in London, walked away from the security and prestige, because he realized he'd been designing buildings that made other people rich instead of spaces that made people happy. Sounds familiar, I said, and found myself telling him my story. Not just about the inheritance, but about the years before it, about being invisible Rebecca who'd forgotten how to want anything for herself. What changed? He asked. My aunt left me a trunk full of jewelry worth millions. But more importantly, she left me a letter that asked me if I had the courage to live my own life. And do you? I looked around the cafe, at the people living their lives, at the city I'd never visited until 3 months ago, at this man I'd just met who might become someone important or might just be a pleasant conversation. I thought about the past 2 years, about all the places I'd been and people I'd met and things I'd learned. I'm learning, I said. Every day I'm learning. David and I spent the next month exploring Buenos Aires together. We went to museums and took cooking classes and danced tango in tiny milongas where locals went, not tourists. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but something deeper, steadier. A connection built on mutual respect and shared understanding that life was short and precious and meant to be lived deliberately. When it came time for him to move on to his next destination, he asked me to come with him. I'm going to Peru, he said. Then maybe Bolivia. I have no fixed plans, no timeline, just a rough direction. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. Okay, let's go to Peru. We traveled together for 6 months, through South America and then Africa. We argued sometimes, about directions and schedules and nothing important. We laughed more. We supported each other through difficult days and celebrated good ones. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was ours. Eventually, we ended up back in Boston. David had a job offer from a firm that specialized in sustainable architecture, designing affordable housing and community spaces. I'd been thinking about writing a book about Linda's life and collection, about the human stories behind objects that outlive us. I think I need to stop moving for a while, I told David one morning as we walked along the Charles River. Not forever, but for now. Put down some roots. Not because I'm scared, but because I want to. I'd like that too, he said. We could get a place together, nothing fancy, just somewhere that's ours. We bought a small house in Somerville. Nothing like Linda's coastal cottage, but with character and potential. We filled it slowly, deliberately, with things that meant something to us. A painting from an artist we'd met in Cape Town. A rug we'd haggled for in a market in Lima. Photographs I'd taken, framed and hung with care. And in the bedroom, in a small safe, I kept a few pieces from Linda's collection. Things I'd held back from the auction. Not the most valuable pieces, but the ones with the best stories. A bracelet from Bangkok, earrings from Istanbul. And the first necklace Linda had ever bought on her travels, a simple silver chain with a small turquoise stone, its tag reading simply, Mexico City, 1979, the beginning of everything. On the anniversary of finding the trunk, I took out Linda's letters and read them again. Her challenges to me to live courageously, to choose my life instead of letting life choose me. I thought about how terrified I'd been that day in her basement, overwhelmed and uncertain and sure I'd make the wrong choice. I'd made so many choices since then. Some good, some bad, all mine. I'd traveled and loved and worked and played. I'd been uncomfortable and scared and exhilarated. I'd become someone I actually recognized when I looked in the mirror, someone who looked a bit like that invisible woman in the cubicle, but with laugh lines around her eyes and stories in her smile. David came home that evening with takeout from our favorite Thai place and a bottle of wine. We ate sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset, talking about our days. He'd presented a design proposal for a community center that morning, and felt good about it. I'd written 3,000 words on my book, and had a breakthrough on a chapter I'd been stuck on. These were small victories, ordinary moments, but they felt like everything. Do you ever regret it? David asked. Leaving your old life? I thought about it honestly. Did I miss the security of a steady paycheck and health insurance and knowing exactly what each day would hold? Sometimes. Did I miss not having to think about my choices because they were all predetermined by expectation and convention? Not for a second. No, I said. I regret spending so long not leaving it. Later that night, I added my own letter to Linda's collection, writing to some hypothetical future niece or nephew or stranger who might someday inherit my small treasures. Dear whoever you are, I wrote, I hope you're reading this because you need it, because you're at a crossroads and don't know which path to take. Let me tell you what I learned. There's no such thing as the right path. There's only the path you choose and the way you walk it. My Aunt Linda left me millions in jewelry and art, But the real inheritance was permission to live differently. So here's my permission to you. Be brave. Make mistakes. Follow curiosity even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. Collect experiences and connections, not just things. And remember that the worst tragedy isn't failure or loss or being wrong. It's getting to the end of your life and realizing you never really lived it. You can keep that junk if you want, or sell it, or throw it away. What matters isn't the objects, but what they represent. A life lived deliberately, courageously, authentically. The choice is yours, always yours. Good luck. You'll need it, but you'll be okay. Love, Rebecca. I sealed the letter and put it with Linda's, in a box with a few special pieces I'd collected on my travels. Nothing worth millions, but everything worth remembering. Someday, someone would find it and decide what to do with it. And maybe, if I was very lucky, they'd find the courage to live their own adventure. But that would be their story. This one was mine. And sitting on that porch with David, watching the stars come out, I knew I'd finally answered Linda's question. Yes, I had the courage. And I always had. I just needed someone to remind me.